Welcome to Sekulow. Listen, the title of the show today, the resurrection of ISIS, no joke. There has been a resurrection, a return of the Islamic State in Afghanistan, utilizing the withdrawal of U.S. troops to begin amassing their own troops, their own fighters. They've taken some actions before in regional provinces, even some attacks in Kabul. But what we are seeing is a combination of two different terror groups who are now utilizing Afghanistan. One is the Haqqani network. That is a mixture of kind of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. I'd explain it as the foreign terror force of the Taliban. Like how Iran has the Al-Quds force, which is their foreign terror force. This is the Taliban and version of that. They work with Al-Qaeda to then plan attacks overseas, targeting non-Afghans, targeting Americans. We are on the brink, unfortunately, I think, of one incident leading to another war in Afghanistan.
Well, that's the problem. Then you've got Khalil Haqqani, the Haqqani network, which is a leading Taliban figure. He was out of Afghanistan. Here's the problem. He's the one who trained with, and his network is kind of a hybrid of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. He trained Osama bin Laden. That's who he trained and radicalize him. So the people that are now coming back into the country with influence are not just coming back into the country, but they're coming back into the country with influence, are the very ones that caused the terror attacks in the United States. So when we say the resurrection of ISIS, we wrote a book when ISIS first became prevalent called Rise of ISIS. It was #1 New York Times bestseller. Now you've got in Afghanistan, you have ISIS, you have the Taliban, and then you have these splinter groups from them. They're calling ISIS-K because the province that it controls is both part of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now, 2,500, I was all in favor of getting troops out in an orderly process. Let me tell you what this is not. Orderly or a process.
No, and I think, listen, we have not gotten into it yet, but the way that the administration talked about this in the lead up to the withdrawal, you would have imagined that ISIS was no major threat there at all, no major threat from Al-Qaeda either, that yes, there were going to be some bumps along the road with the Taliban, but that those outside players who are now the reason why the airport in Kabul is more dangerous is because of the resurrection. Think about this. Donald Trump and his administration eradicated ISIS. They are back now operating in Afghanistan, which will become a safe haven for them to operate if U.S. troops do withdraw, which is exactly what happened and how 9/11 was planned by Al-Qaeda, is that Afghanistan became a safe haven and they were able to make their plans, travel freely, and then ultimately unleash that deadly attack on the United States. We don't want to see history repeat itself. We've got our FOIA prepared on this. We are doing the work we can do on this as the ACLJ. Rick Rinnell will be joining us on the broadcast today. We'll be right back. The return of ISIS was the headline on Drudge. We're calling it the resurrection because ISIS was eliminated. Their top leadership was eliminated. Now, this is an ISIS that operates in Afghanistan, but shares the same goal
around the globe. ISIS pretty much had lost their caliphate. The world threat from ISIS was under Trump was relegated to nothing.
There were different groups in northern Africa, and there were groups in like in Afghanistan trying to claim this the banner of ISIS, but was it really ISIS was a question. Well, now we've got answers to that. But before we got the answers from the administration on, yes, ISIS is back, 3 days ago, President Biden, in his address to the nation, said this about the threat of terror groups inside Afghanistan. Let's play it.
Look, let's put this thing in perspective here. What interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with Al-Qaeda gone? We went to Afghanistan for the express purpose of getting rid of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, as well as getting Osama bin Laden. And we did.
But now these terror groups are back.
Yeah, and they're saying, and let's play the bite where the spokesperson acknowledges that ISIS threat is acute and present. And this is where, what is the president doing?
And who's briefing who?
Who is briefing him? Who is telling him to give a speech to the nation, to the entire country, and say that ISIS is gone, they're not a threat. And then 3 days later, have to deal with an acute and present is exactly what the words are. Listen to them.
How real is this ISIS threat?
The threat is real, it is acute, it is persistent, and it is something that we are focused on with every tool in our arsenal.
Okay.
Our commanders on.
Now, play the Biden bite again. I want people to understand that. This is what's going on, just the beginning of it.
Look, let's put this thing in perspective here. What interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with al-Qaeda gone?
Okay, so there it is. Within 72 hours, he gets it completely wrong. So here's my question to Than. There's talks of hearings. There's bipartisan concern here. What is the temperature in Washington on all of this right now? Because Jake Sullivan's statement had to be prepared too. He didn't just get up there and say acute and present without getting that approved from the White House.
Well, and Jay, he wouldn't have said it unless the evidence was so abundant that it was unavoidable, because that is not an admission that he wanted to make. Here's the concern that I hope is apparent on Capitol Hill today. That should have been readily known to them before this, Jay. I mean, ISIS has been looking for a safe haven from which to operate for the last how many decades now? Of course, this was going to be an obvious place for them to reemerge if we have a withdrawal that is this disorderly. Jay, this week on the Hill, look, there are as many as 5 committees who have said they're going to have hearings on this. We don't have a formal notice for one yet. The House is just returning today, so I think there's a high likelihood you'll see a notice today. I think probably Wednesday is a day that we're looking at. But look, Jay, I mean, having hearings is one thing. Asking real questions of this administration that will improve the situation on the ground as we speak, it's another. I think that remains to be seen whether or not that will happen.
On the same day, President Biden said al-Qaeda was gone. And now they've admitted, ISIS is back too. But on the same day, I think it may have been like an hour later. It wasn't even that much later. Admiral Kirby from the State Department, the spokesperson, said this about al-Qaeda.
Yeah, he's a real confidence builder, by the way.
We know that al-Qaeda is a presence as well as ISIS in Afghanistan, and we've talked about that.
My question for everybody out there listening, especially if you served in Afghanistan or are just thinking about this, if 2,500 American troops working alongside the Afghan national military were able to make these threats minimal from ISIS and al-Qaeda to the point where they weren't really able to operate, why was the Biden plan to just cut and run like this? If things were working, you could end the conflict, keep enough troops in place like we have in Germany, like we have in Korea, but not like what we did in Vietnam, but enough troops in place so that these groups their ultimate goal is to get attacks restarted. I mean, is this what we're going to be waking up to again? New attacks in America by radical Islam? Think about how long it's been since you've used that kind of terminology, where that was a consistent threat to the United States, was radical Islamists who were being radicalized by groups like ISIS, by groups like al-Qaeda. Add a new threat now, because I want you to understand that what the Taliban told Joe Biden is not what they are telling you. Could this is on the cusp of a second U.S.-Afghan war.
And as you said, we've seen an increase of troops from 2,800 to almost 6,000.
Yeah.
Now you have an August 31st deadline. Okay. And by the way, on top of that, we'll talk about this in the next segment, the critical response unit that the Trump administration had with our military in Afghanistan or around Afghanistan, gone in June, which is why we're filing a FOIA lawsuit on that. Listen to the reporter question, which is August 31st, and listen to the response from Joe Biden.
We're 9 days away from the August 31st deadline. Will you extend that deadline, or what is your thought process on extending the evacuation operation?
There's discussions going on among us and the military about extending. Our hope is we will not have to extend, but there are going to be discussions, I suspect, on how far along we are in the process.
We don't even know how many Americans are in right now in Afghanistan.
No, I mean, the number is so broad. It's 10 to 40,000. That is, that's not a number that the military can then figure out, okay, hey, we've got 5,000 Americans out, so and they won't tell us those numbers, by the way. They say, oh, we've flown 30,000 people out. They're not telling you a breakdown of who the people are. Because let's say, you got up to 25,000 Americans. Well, that would be sizable if you thought it was between 10 and 40,000. But if you're not giving us that number, what I'm guessing is it's very, very minimal.
Yeah, because they don't know. Now, they said they removed
14,000. They can't get through the checkpoints.
Well, the checkpoints are the reports from the ground. Now, this is important. Reporters on the ground are saying that the passports are being ripped up by the Taliban at these checkpoints along the way. we're going to get in this a little bit later too. Christians are being targeted specifically by the Taliban, going door to door, searching for Christians, inspecting their iPhones to see if there are any kind of Bible apps or Christian content on them. This is a report in the Christian Post. So Christians are being specifically targeted, but everybody's being targeted. If you're not Taliban, you're being targeted. But and where is the critical response unit? Disbanded in June. Why didn't you not disband it? What were you thinking? Or are they not? And when these generals get up there, with due respect, does it give you confidence when Admiral Kirby gets up there and speaks? Is that a confidence builder for you? Because it's sure not for me.
No, the woke generals are not just damaging the U.S. military internally, here in the United States, recruitment, things like that. But you see the problems when they're focusing on whether or not they should be teaching, Millie's wondering whether they should be teaching critical race theory instead of how they're figuring out Afghanistan. There's a problem. They should all. I mean, this is such a big failure. You would think they'd all be resigned, fired. But the problem is that from the Biden team, I don't know if they're competent enough to pick the next replacements. I mean, certainly Joe Biden has shown the levels of incompetence of his leadership. Kamala Harris has left the country.
Who is she?
She's running away from all of this. Yeah, she's running away. And so you have spokespeople giving us the updates on what people should be taking action on the ground in Afghanistan. Let me tell you something, folks. If you're a woman in Afghanistan, your life is significantly changed now if it's not over.
Drastic.
I mean, there are reports of fathers handing out weapons to their daughters saying either use it to defend yourself or to take your own life.
ISIS?
That's how serious it's gotten because of being captured by these monsters.
Yep.
That is the Taliban, which is very similar because we got to know ISIS very well.
Yep.
They're different regions of the world and different cultures, but the way they operate, very similar.
Very similar. According to counterterrorism analysts at a variety of different organizations, and this is the common consensus, is that ISIS has been waiting for an opportunity like this where its fighters can now exploit what unfortunately is clearly chaos. So, Than, let me ask you this. We know Congress is concerned about this, which is one thing. But let's talk about what we're doing and we only got a minute and 20 seconds here. We've got a FOIA going out probably today on this, especially in that critical response team.
Well, one of the things we've learned, Jay, it's good that Congress gets involved, but it often takes groups like us pushing them to look in the right directions and demand actions in the right direction. This FOIA, Jay, we want to know why they didn't evacuate first. We want to know why the resources and weapons on the ground were not either secured or destroyed in advance of this. And we also want to know why descent cables inside the State Department were either ignored or not elevated as high as they needed to go. Jay, look, I mean, it's a good thing that Congress is looking at it, but we have learned time and time again, we actually have to focus them in on the questions that need to be asked and answered if they're going to be effective.
Folks, we're going to take your calls, your comments. Rick Rennell, our senior advisor for foreign policy and national security, is joining us in the next segment of the broadcast. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sekulow. We're joined by our senior advisor for national security, foreign policy, Rick Rennell. Makes me concerned is that are we looking at part 2 of the Afghan war instead of the drawdown?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Jordan. Look, let's be very clear. On January 20th of this year, we had a very, in Afghanistan, we had freedom. And the Afghans were looking forward to creating more freedom. And the embassy, the U.S. embassy, was working well. All of that on January 20th of this year. And now look at the chaos that we have. We went from Donald Trump telling the Taliban exactly what to do, and the Taliban in fear that they would be bombarded from the air. And now, fast forward to today, the Taliban is telling us what to do. They're telling us to get out by a date certain. The whole script has been completely flipped. This is a political crisis. I want to be very clear. I keep saying this. This is not an intelligence failure. For those listening, you should understand that your government, the U.S. government, through intelligence and State Department Foreign Service officers and men and women in uniform at the Pentagon, They all did their job. They presented warnings to the political class. It was the politicians that messed this up at the end. We need to be very clear with our U.S. military. They protected the United States. They went to Afghanistan. They got rid of the immediate threat. They did their job. They should be very proud, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. Yep. The politicians in Washington are the ones who messed it up.
Now, Rick, the reports are, I mean, Jake Sullivan has said this. He talks about the ISIS threat as being acute and persistent. This comes 3 days after Joe Biden saying that ISIS is not a factor in Afghanistan, so totally gets that wrong. Then another troubling report, and I'm not just doing this because it's Christians, because I know that the persecution of what the Taliban's doing to women and other groups is just outrageous. But we're now finding reports coming out of Afghanistan that there are a lot of Christians in Afghanistan, but they have to operate pretty much underground, as you can imagine, as you know firsthand. But now the Taliban is they've got a list because there's these house churches almost like China, and they're going door to door. They're asking for their phones, seeing if there's any kind of Christian content or Bible apps on their phones, and then they destroy these people, kill them. And this is what we're dealing with. And Joe Biden then decides in June to remove and dismantle the critical response unit that when you were in office was right there in the region to prevent exactly that. What are they thinking? Who is advising the administration? It's like you said, it's not intelligence here. It's what? This is a policy move?
Well, let's talk about who's advising this administration. Susan Rice is considered to be the domestic policy advisor. We all know that that's phony. She's actually running the foreign policy. But do you know who her two deputies were when she was the national security advisor? One deputy was Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of State now.
Right.
The second deputy was Avril Haines, who runs national intelligence. She's the director of national intelligence now. Those were Susan Rice's two deputies. Our national security advisor right now, Jake Sullivan, is the individual who sent Hillary Clinton classified emails on her laptop. This is a group of people that are highly, highly partisan. They gave us Libya disaster in Benghazi. They sat on their hands during Syria when it unfolded into a genocide and ISIS took over. Now they're delivering us Afghanistan. Look, Susan Rice is the one who was Bill Clinton's advisor when the Rwandan genocide unfolded. This is a history of failing up in Washington. That's what happened.
Failing up is the right word because these people get promoted from the State Department to the White House. I mean, they were the number 2. Now they're the lead person. The thing that I'm you mentioned Benghazi. I think we're seeing Benghazi replayed on a much broader scale because, I mean, we're the United States of America, and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are not fearing us. They are controlling the situation, which is, I wrote a book called The Rise of ISIS. The end of that was we finally defeated them. The caliphate was destroyed when you were in office, and now not only is it reconstituting, it's more dangerous.
Yeah. I want to make 2 points that are very important for our audience. One is that when Donald Trump was in office, he wanted our troops home a long time ago. He adjusted the deadline constantly, not because he wanted to, because of facts on the ground, real-time information that forced him to adjust. You can have a goal of bringing our troops home, but you have to pay attention to the information that's coming on the ground. The second point, which is very important, is that, yes, the Trump administration spoke with the Taliban consistently. That's not the problem. Speaking to the Taliban is not the problem. The problem is, what does the Taliban hear? They heard when Donald Trump was in office that if they made a move on cities, they would be bombed and that they would face severe military pushback. Under the Biden administration, the Taliban is not hearing that. They're rushing to take over Afghanistan.
You know, Rick, you actually tweeted out today, it was a simple tweet, but that the Pentagon and the State Department have no idea how many Americans are trapped in Afghanistan. So we get these numbers about evacuations, about how many people are on the flights. We have gotten no breakdown yet of how many Americans have actually been able to get out of Afghanistan. How serious is that?
It's very serious. Our Secretary of State I think is a disaster. This past weekend, he was talking to, in his words, President Karzai. Now, President Karzai is not the president of Afghanistan. What's scary is I'm wondering, was he speaking to the former president, pretending like maybe he was still the president? Did he not know? Or did he mix up the names? Either way, we have a press corps in Washington that is disinterested in the facts, that are racing to cover up already and move on and talk about, masks and COVID issues. Look, this is relevant to every single person listening, because if Afghanistan becomes a safe haven for the Taliban and for ISIS and Al Qaeda, which is exactly what's going to happen, they will be able to plan future attacks. And that's what we wanted to guard against. That's why we wanted to utilize technology. The Trump administration wanted to utilize technology to push back, maybe bombing from the air or other forms, but we were watching them, and there were conditions on the Taliban that were always going to be met.
Let's take a call.
Yeah, Julie calling from California online too. Hi, Julie. Welcome to Sekulow. You're on the air.
Hi, Bill. I think it's time to start thinking about impeaching the president, because he is not even performing his most basic duty of protecting the United States of America, blatantly Afghanistan, and also people and drugs coming in from the border.
Sure.
And can you start thinking about impeaching him, how we can do that?
Well, here's the issue with that. You know, Julie, who would be your president then, right? Kamala Harris.
She'd be equally disastrous.
Right. So you have to question then, do you go through, you act like the Democrats and do this just for political purposes, which, by the way, they don't have the votes for. The Republicans are in the minority in the House, so it doesn't even move forward. But second, be careful what you wish for, because she disappeared into somewhere else in Southeast Asia, not the problem area in Southeast Asia, by the way, Afghanistan or somewhere around there. But she disappeared, and when was asked about an Afghanistan question, she went to Vietnam, which, by the way, some interesting symbolism there, because the Vietnamese leadership there are the ones that beat the United States. Yeah. They are still also a horrendous regime. Yeah. Not quite as much of a threat internationally to the U.S. Obviously, we do work with Vietnam now. We've normalized relations. But, they're not terrorists.
Those people that are my age, you remember what it was like when helicopters were taking off in Hanoi. This is just, we are reliving. It's, I don't want this to be a political discussion, but it's just ironic that it's always in these administrations. It's Jimmy Carter, nice guy, horrible policies. Okay? Who kind of was the exception? Bill Clinton. Clinton was pretty tough when he needed to be. The others, Obama, I don't know what he was doing. And then
it's a new worldview. It's a new world. It shifted a lot.
In 2000, it shifted.
Remember, a lot of Democrats, the reason why Hillary Clinton was always kind of having issues getting over the top versus Obama first and then second even, versus President Trump, was that the progressives really didn't like her. They thought she was too much of a hawk, is the term, too pro-military.
Yep.
And I think we can both attest, see her work in the State Department, that we disagree with her on most policies. When it came to foreign policies, especially when it came to having to take military action. Remember, she didn't get to make the calls, but she was tough.
Yeah, she was tough.
That shifted from the Democrat Party. That's a different Democrat Party.
Well, it certainly, yes, it was. And then Joe Biden decided what he was going to do was go back to this kind of previous Obama administration, or even flashback this back. I'd say he's flashing it back to Jimmy Carter right now.
Yeah, the one exception for Hillary Clinton was, of course, Benghazi. But even that, remember, she was trying to walk a line.
That wasn't her
for an administration that had put in this new policy. I do want to say, I want to play Vice President Harris, because you brought that up. If you impeach Joe Biden, this is who you get as president, running away to Vietnam, which the symbolism there, horrendous right now. Cancel that meeting. It's not even important. What is so important in Vietnam right now with all the issues facing the world that you need to be in Vietnam? But this is how she answered the question of Afghanistan.
On the issue of Afghanistan. And to that end, we have seen a successful drawdown of the embassy.
What you mean the embassy got raided? It was about to be raided by the Taliban? There is no more U.S. embassy. Do you know where the U.S. embassy in Kabul is now? The airport. Okay, the building that was the embassy has been taken by the Taliban. So she's lying again.
I think it's one of the most expensive embassies we ever built. Unreal.